It's the Real Estate Podcast, brought to you by ANZ Home Loans for financial well-beings.
Yes, it is another weekend. It has arrived and the Real Estate Breakfast Saturday Property Show is back, breaking down for you the Australian property market. Are you still at that stage of not being able to fall asleep the night before viewing your potential dream property? Lucky you, if that is the case. Most people are having to haul themselves out of bed today and go through the whole process once again. The psychology of buying a property, it really does mess with the brain. Biggest buying decision, of course, untold amount of stress levels and anxiety, more ups and downs than a roller coaster, never ending. So yeah, good luck with today. I hope that falls the way that you wanted to. Got another busy Saturday show coming up. It is May the 30th. Housing Minister Claire O'Neil, she is pushing harder for higher density housing, arguing that Australia simply can't solve its affordability crisis by building endless suburban sprawl. What is your take on this? The government wants more apartments, townhouses and mixed-use developments closer to transport, jobs and infrastructure, which all makes common sense, particularly when you look overseas. Supporters say that it's the only realistic way to increase supply quickly, while critics argue communities are resisting rapid urban change. But change is needed, as Claire O'Neil suggests.
I've been involved in town planning for a really long time. I was a mayor 20 years ago and, we were having arguments about where housing would go. They have very little resemblance for the public discussion that we're having about density in housing. We need to build more dense cities in our country. Full stop. There is no country in the world, anything like Australia, that has affordable housing and the density issues that we confront. It is a part of the solution here and it's a very important part of the solution. What I increasingly see when I talk to most Australians about this is that for the first time, people are making the connection between the housing development down the street from them and the capacity of their children to get into a home of their own. And that's the connection that needs to be made. And so I wouldn't certainly be on my feet here being sharp with Australians about this. I just think we need to keep explaining to them. Density can be a fantastic thing for our cities. You see huge improvements in amenity when you see good density. I live in the beautiful suburb of Oakleigh in Melbourne. If I went to any city in Europe which was as far away from the city as I am, I'd step out of the train station and it would be medium density housing, flourishing local economy, and people getting to share in the fantastic life that we get to live in my suburb. When I get off the train now, it's mainly one story as far as the eye can see. But we do need to fix that if we're going to get on top of this for the country.
So do you agree with Claire O'Neil on that issue? Of course, our email address is myrealestatepodcast@gmail.com. As we right now catch up with Cian Hussey, he is from the Institute of Public Affairs. And a very good morning on this Saturday morning, Cian, to the Real Estate Breakfast. Yeah, what is your take there around what Claire O'Neil is saying?
I think it's common sense that we do need different kinds of housing available, apartments or townhouses and houses, single family houses. But Australians do have a preference towards single family houses. And I think that it's important that we have those and we have that option for Australians and for their families to raise kids with a backyard or a front yard. I think it's interesting that the minister is trying to encourage Australians or tell Australians that they need to draw a connection between medium density housing and affordability or the ability of their children to buy houses. This government seems to want to do anything but draw a connection between levels of migration and housing affordability. We do need some more supply, and building more houses, building more apartments, building more townhouses is undoubtedly a good thing. But why don't we talk about the demand side of the equation as well? Why don't we talk about the fact that to build those new developments, it will take years. And in the meantime, the fastest, most effective lever that we could pull to ease that pressure on property prices and help people get into the housing market would be to bring down those levels of migration, which have been running at hundreds of thousands per year for the last few years, way out of whack with what we've had historically in Australia, and certainly, way out of whack with the kind of 1990s level of immigration that we were used to.
Yeah, migration, it is such a big talking point. We are constantly talking about it week on week. And the government has extended the ban on foreign investors buying established Australian homes until June of 2029, arguing that it gives local buyers a fairer shot in the market already under pressure. Will this actually, what do you think, improve affordability for everyday Australians?
I think a ban on foreign buyers, it's a common sense measure that I think Australians will get behind. And they will say, why should people who are physically overseas be able to buy properties in Australia when I can't afford a house? It's a good measure that I would support, and, props to the government for doing that. But we've brought in 1.3 million people into Australia over the last 5 years, and all those people are in Australia. They're able to buy housing. So, the numbers for foreign buyers, people who are physically overseas trying to buy property in Australia are quite small. So the effect will be quite marginal. But why don't we talk about the plans to bring another 1.2 million people over the next 5 years and the impact that that's going to have on property prices. I think until the government really starts dealing seriously with levels of migration and talking about the impacts that levels of migration have on house prices and rent costs as well, we're not really going to get anywhere with this issue of housing affordability.
Even with tighter restrictions, international interest in Aussie properties is still rising, particularly from buyers in China, the United States, Singapore, and our friends in New Zealand. Many of these buyers, of course, they're cashed up, they're ready, they're focused on long-term investing. Do you think the foreign demand really move the market as much as people think it does?
I don't think it does, and that's why I would encourage the government to be more focused on just the raw migration numbers and the impact that has on stirring domestic demand. There are exemptions in this foreign property buyers restriction. So if you want to move to Australia and start a business and invest significant amounts of money in Australia, there's exemptions. You can buy a property if your plan is to move here and start a business. Like I said, the effect really is marginal. We're talking about thousands of people per year who might be overseas and looking to buy a property in Australia. The real issue at the heart of the matter is the hundreds of thousands of people who are coming to Australia every year, and then they need somewhere to live. And that is just adding huge amounts to the demand side of the equation. And we're simply not able to keep up with the supply side of the equation. And so inevitably, that's economics 101, massive demand increase and no supply increase, and prices go up.
Yeah, migration, it continues to be part of the housing debate. Industry groups on the other side, they're arguing that migrants are also critical to Australia's economy and workforce. So there is lean into both ways of that argument. It is the Saturday Property Show. We are talking to Cian this morning. When we come back, we are back to the budget. And a couple of points that we want to cover off with Cian. We'll do that next.
From the emotion of property, the economic inflation, managing your expectations, lack of stock, price growth, construction appetite, days on the market. Stay informed with us and know your property. You're listening to the Saturday Property Market Update.
Hope you got a fantastic weekend lined up if you are looking at property. As I said earlier, good luck with all of that. Yes, let's get to the budget. And boy, so many talking points, Cian, since this has dropped. Does the budget really change, first question for you this morning, the supply and demand for you?
I don't think it really does. We're still actually learning more about what's in the budget and how things are going to be working. I feel like every day we're learning more about the detail of the policies that are in the budget. There's still some more detail to come. And until these things are legislated or being actively debated in Parliament in detail, we won't know exactly what the actual impacts are going to be. And I think if you look at the budget this year compared to last year, the government has actually lifted their expectations of net overseas migration. So they've increased net overseas migration expectations by around 55,000 people over the next couple of years. When you compare that with the supply measures that are in the budget, I just don't think that we're substantially changing that equation. It seems like we're keeping the demand levels the same as what they've been in the past few years, or increasing them further, and we're not really adjusting the supply side of the equation. We know, for example, that under the National Housing Accord, which the government has committed to building 1.2 million million new houses. They're around 80,000 approvals behind on where they should be. So I think one of the things that the government does need to focus on is getting that supply up in the way that they have said they're going to. They're falling behind on it. They failed to implement increases in supply that they said they were going to do. And so I think the real key thing to address in the coming months and the years ahead is that demand issue, is scaling back those migration numbers until we get on top of approvals, until we get on top of construction and new builds.
Yeah, there's a lot in what you're saying. The RBA had an interesting piece on data for property investors. So what did that sort of tell you?
Yeah, so the Reserve Bank of Australia have released an interesting piece of analysis in their bulletin, which came out on Thursday this week. One of the statistics in there that I found very fascinating was in the year 2000, around 35% of all property investors in Australia were aged under 40. And today that's declined to about 25%. So we've gone from 35% of property investors being under 40 to 25% today. What their data shows is that there's been this skew away from property investors being younger in the kind of family formation years or wealth building years, and now property investors are much more likely to be older or in retirement. And I think this touches on an issue that the government has correctly identified, which is that the housing market and the wealth that Australians used to build through housing, it's no longer really an opportunity that's open to as many young people as it used to be. So yeah, definitely some interesting data coming out of the RBA. The thing to keep an eye on now will be what the policy response is from the government, and if they start to take this issue seriously, because for a lot of young people, it's one of the biggest decisions that they'll ever make is buying a house, getting on the property ladder, and that enables so many things. It enables them to have more stability where they're living, to lay down long-term roots, to get married and start a family and have children. And so I think that we really do need to address this issue. It's a critical issue for young Australians not being able to get into the housing market today.
Yeah, just talking about those first home buyers, you're a younger guy. You've got friends clearly that are trying to get onto the property ladder. One of the interesting things is, we were talking about it this week, many younger buyers have just said, no, I don't think so. I don't think a mortgage is me. I don't want the commitment. I want to live my life free of the noose around the neck. Among your friends, are you hearing a little bit of that?
You do hear that from some people, but I think that that is often driven by a sense of hopelessness around the just astronomical cost of buying a house. The house price to income ratio has just exploded over the last 25 years. And so I think a lot of young people are looking at that and saying, my parents were able to buy a family home for 3 or 4 times their annual income. Why should I be spending 9 times or 10 times my annual income to get into a home? The instinct is still there. All my friends and all the young people I know want to buy a house. And we know from survey data that overwhelmingly young Australians do want to buy a house. I think that it's just gotten so hard. It's gotten so expensive. It's become a frightening prospect. That's definitely not sustainable. We need to do something about this. And just to link back to what we were talking about at the top of the show, all the young people I know, they don't want to buy apartments and they don't want to buy townhouses. They want to buy a house with a backyard and, room for their future children to play in, a room for a porch at the front where they can sit with their mates, room for a barbecue out the back. That's the Australian dream. That's what Australians want. And I think while the supply of apartments and townhouses is important and people can choose to live there and that's great, we shouldn't be kind of giving up on that Australian dream of having single family houses built and making them affordable for young Australians to get into.
Yeah, I think you summed it up for first home buyers with 2 words: a frightening prospect in this current climate. Hey, good on you, Cian. That's great stuff on our Saturday morning property show. We'll wrap it up there. Thanks for coming on to the Real Estate Breakfast and enjoy your weekend.
Thanks, Craig. Good to chat.
We connect you to the best real estate information across Australia. The Real Estate Podcast.